Welcome back to Desire and Power, Sexuality in Ancient Rome, Part 2. Let's continue. What of ordinary people, those whose lives were not chronicled by historians or commemorated in marble? Marriage served a clear purpose. It joined families, secured alliances, produced legitimate heirs. A senator married his daughter to another senator's son, and the republic's future was secured. Love might develop between spouses, but it was not required. What was required was loyalty, or at least the appearance of it. Women were expected to be faithful. Men were not. The streets of Rome were filled with opportunities for sex. The lupanars, the brothels, operated openly under the regulation of the aediles who managed the city's moral climate. Prostitutes registered with the state, paid taxes, served citizens of every social class. Some brothels catered specifically to men seeking other men. The prostitutes themselves were often slaves or freedmen, people whose bodies were available because they lacked the protection of full citizenship. The baths were another matter entirely. These vast public complexes, some as large as city blocks, were the heart of Roman social life. Men and women bathed separately, moving through rooms of increasing heat, scraping oil and sweat from their skin, plunging into cold pools. But the baths were not just about cleanliness. They were places to see and be seen, to conduct business, to form friendships, to pursue affairs. What happened in the dimmer corners, in the massage rooms, in the hot pools where bodies pressed close together, was not always strictly innocent. Roman law addressed these matters with remarkable specificity. The Digest of Justinian, compiled in the 6th century but drawing on centuries of earlier legal thought, shows judges wrestling with questions of sexual conduct. When was sex a crime? When was it merely private behavior? The law cared deeply about status. The sexual violations of freeborn people was punishable by death. Adultery with a married woman could get you killed by her husband. But consensual sex between men, as long as the passive partner was a slave or prostitute or actor, someone already marked as infamies, someone outside the circle of respectable citizenship, that was not a crime. The moralists, of course, complained constantly. Seneca wrote essays condemning excess and self-indulgence. Juvenal satires dripped with contempt for men he saw as too soft, too Greek, too willing to play the passive role. But their complaints were about decadence, about the corruption of virtue, not about desire itself. They feared what uncontrolled sexuality represented: the collapse of hierarchy, the erosion of discipline, the triumph of passion over reason. For 7 centuries, this was how Rome understood sex: power and submission, status and shame, the citizen and the slave, the active and the passive. These categories organized the world more thoroughly than the question of whether one desired men or women or both. In the year 312, everything changed. Constantine stood at the Milvian Bridge outside Rome, facing his rival Maxentius in battle. The empire itself was at stake. According to legend, Constantine saw a vision, a cross of light in the sky, and words, "In this sign, conquer." Whether the vision was real or invented later, the result was real enough. Constantine won the battle, seized control of the Western Empire, and within a year issued the Edict of Milan, granting Christians freedom to worship openly. For 3 centuries, Christianity had been a persecuted sect, its followers arrested, tortured, fed to lions in the arena. Now, the religion of outcasts became the religion of emperors, and with that transformation came a revolution in how Romans understood sex. The Christians brought with them a wholly different sexual ethic. Where Romans had worried about status and self-control, Christians preached about sin and salvation. Where Romans had divided people into those who took active roles and those who took passive roles, Christians spoke of souls equally precious in God's eyes. Where Romans had seen sex as a natural part of life to be enjoyed within proper boundaries, Christians saw it as a dangerous temptation, permissible only within marriage for the purpose of procreation. The book of Leviticus was clear: a man who lay with another man as with a woman had committed an abomination and should be put to death. Paul's letter to the Romans reinforced this, condemning men who exchanged natural relations for unnatural ones. These texts had always existed, but now they had the force of imperial law behind them. In 342, Constantine's sons, Constantius and Constans, issued a decree that stunned the empire. The law appeared in the Codex Theodosianus with language both vague and ominous. When a man marries as a woman, offering himself to men, What does he desire when sex has lost its significance? When the crime is one which it is not profitable to know, when Venus is changed into another form, when love is sought and not found, we order the laws to arise, the statutes to be armed with an avenging sword, so that those infamous persons who are now, or who hereafter may be guilty, may be subjected to exquisite punishment. Scholars still debate exactly what the law prohibited. The language is so convoluted it borders on poetry. But most agree on this. For the first time in Roman history, the passive partner in sex between men was subject to capital punishment, not because he had violated another citizen, not because he had failed in his duty to procreate, but because the act itself was now defined as a crime against divine law. The irony did not escape contemporaries. Constans himself was rumored to have male lovers, though this may have been slander from his enemies. Nero had married men openly and died by suicide, but not by law. Now, ordinary men could be executed for doing what emperors had once done with impunity. The laws grew harsher. In 390, Emperors Valentinian, Theodosius, and Arcadius decreed that any man who took the role of a woman in sex should be burned alive in public. The law appeared in both the Codex Theodosianus and a collection called the Lex Dei, the Law of God. The message was clear. What had once been a matter of personal conduct was now a matter of cosmic justice. By the 6th century under Justinian, the legal transformation was complete. His institutes, the textbook that trained every law student in the empire, declared that both partners in male intercourse, active and passive alike, should be punished with death. The reasoning was theological. Such acts offended God, and God's anger manifested in earthquakes, famines, plagues. The empire's survival depended on stamping out sexual sin. The temples of Antinous were destroyed, the sculptures were smashed or buried, the poetry was locked away, the bathhouses were shuttered or repurposed. What had been celebrated or at least tolerated became unspeakable. Christianity had not merely changed Rome's laws, it had changed how Romans understood the nature of desire itself. Stand today in the ruins of the Roman Forum, where senators once debated the fate of nations. Look up at the Colosseum, where thousands cheered as gladiators fought and died. Walk the stones of the Via Appia, where the crucified followers of Spartacus once lined the road for miles. Rome is everywhere. Its influence woven into our language, our law, our very conception of civilization. And Roman sexuality remains one of history's most revealing mirrors. For 7 centuries, from the founding legends of Romulus and Remus to the conversion of Constantine, Rome treated sex as an expression of social order. What you did in bed announced your place in the world. The citizen penetrated, the slave submitted, the emperor commanded, the powerless obeyed. Gender mattered less than status. Love mattered less than hierarchy. Then came Christianity, and with it a new map of sexual morality. Suddenly, it was not enough to maintain one's social position. One had to guard one's soul. Pleasure became dangerous. The body became a battleground between flesh and spirit, and acts that had once been unremarkable or merely scandalous became sins worthy of death. This transformation echoes still. When we argue about sexuality today, we are still, in some sense, arguing about what Rome meant, what Rome teaches, what Rome allows us to say about human nature. Was the Roman acceptance of same-sex relations between men a sign of enlightened tolerance? Or was it merely another expression of a brutal hierarchy that treated human bodies as objects to be used? The answer is both, and neither. The Romans were not us. They lived in a world we can barely imagine, where life was short and violent and cheap, where slavery was the foundation of prosperity, where men held absolute power over their households and spent it freely. To celebrate Rome's sexual attitudes is to ignore the suffering of slaves, the silencing of women, the cruelty that undergirded every moment of apparent freedom. But to dismiss Rome entirely is to lose something valuable: the knowledge that human sexuality is not fixed, not eternal, not dictated by nature or biology alone. The Romans proved that cultures can organize desire in radically different ways, can draw the boundaries of acceptable and unacceptable in patterns we would never anticipate. From the graffiti of Pompeii to the laws of Byzantium, from the love poems of Catullus to the condemnations of Justinian, Rome's story of sexuality is a story of transformation, of pleasure and power, virtue and vice, desire, and dominion. And above all, it is a story that reminds us that the past is always stranger than we imagine, always richer than we remember, always whispering that nothing we take for granted had to be this way. The ruins remain, the stones remember. And if we listen closely, we can still hear the voices of a world where sex meant something entirely different than it does today.